Welcome the founder and president of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, Rick Doblin.
Amazing. The future is psychedelic. Welcome to the Psychedelic 20s. When I think about this conference with over 12,000 registered people, with opening talks by the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, and the former Texas governor, Rick Perry, and Dr. Josh Gordon, the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and over 500 other speakers, I can only wonder, am I tripping? I think not. It's not that I'm tripping, it's that culture is tipping. One of the most important books I read was Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse. And when I was romancing the woman who later became my wife, I read this book out loud to her. And it begins with this sentence: "It was my destiny to join in a great experience." And I feel that all of us here sense in some ways that it is our destiny to join in the great experience of both individual and cultural and human-wide consciousness transformation, which is what we need for both survival and for humanity to thrive. Welcome to the Psychedelic 20s. The first conference that MAPS had was really in 1990, and Timothy Leary was one of the speakers. And after his talk, I went up on stage and I asked him, what advice do you have for those of us who are trying to work with the government to try to develop psychedelics back into legally available prescription medicines and to work on drug policy reform? And he said, fuck the government. He said, I am so far past trying to ask permission for anything, but I'm really glad you're doing it. And that was the passage of the torch. Now, some examples of cultural tipping points is that this is the fourth in a series of psychedelic science conferences, and this one is more than 4 times as large as the previous one in 2017, which itself was the largest psychedelic conference ever in history. There's some other signs of the cultural tipping point. This is a street sign in Chicago around 10 years ago that said no access to LSD. Now, just last year, they changed the sign. Now it says use LSD. Now, for those of you from Chicago, this also means Lakeshore Drive. And one of the most important TV shows, Ted Lasso, of recent times, that had its season finale just a few weeks ago. On the last episode, it had the main character reading a book on an airplane. And what was that book? Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. And we think of that book also as a cultural tipping point, and we call Michael the pollinator. Now, another sign has been the growth of the science. So MAPS has been working for 37 years. And MAPS and the MAPS Public Benefit Corp., which is our pharmaceutical arm, have now reached the point of 2 successful phase 3 studies of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. And we're anticipating submitting the application to the FDA later this year. And we're hopeful that if all goes well, we'll have the potential approval by the middle of next year, maybe around a year from now. Yeah. And this is just really one of many psychedelic therapies. The for-profit company, Compass Pathways, is now in phase 3 studies for psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, and the nonprofit USONA is also working on finishing their phase 2 studies and hope to start their phase 3 studies for psilocybin for major depressive disorder. And we have hundreds of other psychedelic companies doing various different things. Some of them are trying to invent new psychedelics, and I look forward to trying them. And we have now over 4 to 5 times the scientific publications on psychedelics at the height of the psychedelic 60s. And we have over 1,500 ketamine clinics in the United States right now. And the AMA, amazing, and the AMA has recently approved a new billing code for long therapy sessions so that insurance companies will be able to bill for and pay for 8-hour MDMA sessions and 6-hour therapy, psilocybin. And, yeah. Now, all of this science has also helped build drug policy reform. And so we now have a vast majority of marijuana voters, of American voters, who are in favor of the legalization of marijuana for adult use. And we also have a lot of work on drug policy reform for psychedelics. So here in Denver, this was the first city that made mushrooms the lowest enforcement priority. And then in 2020, the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative passed, which made state legal trained guides able to provide psilocybin experiences both to people with diagnoses, but also to people for personal growth, for spiritual experiences, for creativity, expanding the range of uses. And Colorado in 2022 expanded on this and made the Natural Plant Medicine Act that opens up to a range of natural plant psychedelics. And we just heard recently that they're trying to accelerate the access to Ibogaine because of the dire nature of the opiate crisis. Yeah. And in Kentucky, just a few weeks ago, they allocated $42 million for Ibogaine research, $7 million a year for 6 years. Now, some people in the for-profit psychedelic world may worry that this drug policy reform is bad for business. Because if you can grow your own mushrooms and buy MDMA for $10 or $20 or something like that one day, this will take a while to happen, but I think it's actually good for business. It will destigmatize the whole field, and it will make more people want to go to the trained professionals where they can get customized treatment covered by insurance. Now, how did this all begin? Let's go way back. So from around 1600 BC, for around 2,000 years, the Greeks had the celebration of Eleusis. And this involved a potion called kykeon that they drank several hours before they reached the ceremonial space. And modern scholarship has identified this kykeon potion as containing psychedelic components. And Brian Muir Rescue has written a very compelling book, The Immortality Key, about how early Christianity involved spiked wine that had also psychedelic components. Now, the Catholic Church wiped out the Eleusis in 392. They wanted to be the intermediary between people and spirituality. And psychedelics have basically been suppressed in Western culture ever since. And we all know the tragic story of the burning of the witches. Many of them were involved in plant medicines. And then we had this resurgence of interest in the psychedelic 60s. And of course, that was too difficult for the culture at the time. There was a big backlash with President Nixon declaring the war on drugs and the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, and the suppression of psychedelic research, not just in the US, but all over the world. Now, I really learned about psychedelics in 1972. I was doing a lot of, a lot of psychedelics, both mescaline and also LSD. And I had a lot of difficult trips, and I wasn't able to let go. It was hard, it was scary. And I went to the guidance counselor at school, and And this was New College of Florida, a private school. Yeah, and the guidance counselor took me seriously. And I was so fortunate that he gave me a book to read by Stan Grof. And this book was Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research. Reading that book changed my life, and it made me devote myself to psychedelics to try to bring back psychedelic research. And Stan has been my mentor ever since. He is the through line from the psychedelic research in the 50s, and then after the crackdown to developing holotropic breathwork, which demonstrates that these experiences are in us. They're not just in the pill. They're natural to us. And then he has trained many of the new psychedelic therapists as well. And we are so lucky that he is here with us today. And, and now, and let's all wish him a happy birthday. He turns 92 on July 1. I love you, Stan and Brigitte. It's really, Stan is the pioneer. Stan is the one. And several years after I met Stan in 72, after I read his book, and I had the most important dream of my life. And this dream had some of the imagery from 2001 Space Odyssey. And there was a Holocaust survivor on his deathbed. And he was telling me that he had been miraculously saved from death, and he knew that he was saved for a purpose, but he wasn't sure what that purpose was. And now, with me there in the room, with him on his deathbed, he said he knew what his purpose was, and that was to tell me to devote myself to psychedelics. And that if we could all help have these experiences of how we're all interconnected and we all are interdependent, that would be an antidote to genocide, to racism, and that's what I should work on to prevent future genocide and holocausts. And no matter how hard it's been with the FDA or the DEA or the National Institute on Drug Abuse or public opinion, it's much easier than being in the concentration camps. And this is why I've never been willing to give up and why we're still here. Now, the day before MDMA became illegal, on June 30th, 1985, I took MDMA. And I was, near the end of the day, I was sort of working on politics, and I was writing a letter to the editor of Business Week. They had just published an article saying that MDMA was being criminalized, and it was known as ecstasy. It would also stop the recreational use, but it would also end the therapeutic use. And so my letter, I talked about how I wanted to form a company, and hopefully we would get support to eventually bring psychedelic therapy back so that it would become more than a dream. And when I went to print this out, the printer went haywire, and it just printed, "Become more than a dream." And so I saved that, I framed it, it's been on my desk for 38 years as an inspiration that we need to make this more than a dream. Now, the next part that I'm going to share is actually a true story. A couple days afterwards, I was looking at the printer that I was using, and I noticed somehow or other I had dropped a hit of blotter acid into the printer mechanism. So maybe this printer was actually tripping to tell me this message. Now, this reminds me of one of the anti-drug statements, only losers use drugs, which we have turned around to mean only users lose drugs. Now, the real psychedelic renaissance that we're experiencing right now is really due to the nonprofit organizations that we need to honor that really work to build this capacity. Because in the early days, it didn't seem like there would be any way to really succeed or to commercialize. It just was a hard struggle. So it all had to be through these nonprofit organizations. But now that MAPS and the MAPS Public Benefit Corp is seeing the potential FDA approval, We need a new vision for the next couple decades and generations, and this new vision is toward a world of net zero trauma by 2070. And what we mean by net zero trauma is not no trauma. There's always going to be trauma from disease, from accidents, from natural disasters, from human cruelty. And not only is there trauma, but there's multi-generational trauma through epigenetics and the passage from parents of set points for depression, anxiety. But we want to stop adding to the burden of trauma that humanity is suffering. And so we think about this net zero trauma. And how are we going to really measure our progress towards that? We're going to develop a metric for gross national trauma. You may know that Bhutan has a measure for gross national happiness, which has now been applied for countries around the world. And also there's gross national product for economic development. There's measures of peace, of democracy on a national level. And so we're going to develop this metric, and we will use it to monitor our success. And it's not just from MDMA, it's from all the other psychedelics and tens of thousands of therapists and other psychedelic treatments and psychedelic clinics. But what we're going to really need to do is prioritize going to global communities with the largest burden of trauma and fewer resources for treatment. And we're going to need to work with refugees, with migrants, with victims of violence and war, with victims of sexual trauma. We're going to need to use psychedelics for conflict resolution. And you'll hear at this conference that there are small groups of Israelis and Palestinians using MDMA and ayahuasca together to try to find their common ground. Now, this is the MAPS logo as interpreted by Alex Gray. And the most important part of this logo is that the hands are in front and the psychedelic swirls is in the back. And what that means is this is about humans helping humans. This is about therapy. This is about psychedelics that make the therapy more effective. The psychedelics are just tools. They can be used well, they can be used poorly. And what we're going to want to do is have tens, hundreds, thousands of therapists. We're going to have to develop new group therapy models and local healers in different places. But the psychedelic clinics of the future will look something like this. That you'll be able to go to therapists who are cross-trained in ketamine and MDMA and psilocybin and ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT and whoever else gets invented on the line. And so we'll be able to have customized treatment programs. And one of the most important parts of training therapists is for them to have their own psychedelic experiences. Now, how do we all move forward? The first thing is every one of us can step out of the psychedelic closet. Some people call it the psychedelic medicine cabinet. And speak to your family, to your friends, to people who are scared about psychedelics, who don't know enough. And tell your stories, even if they're of difficult trips. It's really important to do that. We also need people, all of you, to speak to your elected officials and tell them and ask them, we need more federal, state, and local funding for psychedelic research. And we need, again, all of these people interested in therapists to learn about how to administer these new treatments. Now, none of this is possible, actually, without resources. And so the psychedelic revolution needs you. This is our QR code. We actually have a $500,000 matching grant from Peter and Eliza Palangian that we hope to match during this week of the conference. And we'd like all of your help for that, but not just for MAPS, for the other groups. There's a whole ecosystem that you'll see in the marketplace. And if we work together and do our best to not fuck it up, is what Stan has asked us not to do, which we're not going to do, we will be able to build a world of mass mental health, a spiritualized humanity, a world of net zero trauma by 2070, and all of this can become more than a dream. Welcome to the Psychedelic 20s. Thank you. Wow, thank you. It's a grand adventure together. Thank you. Wow.
Please welcome Governor Rick